The door swung shut behind Colin Rourke, hard enough to rattle the coat hooks in the hallway, and Lara Beaumont stood in the kitchen with her hand pressed flat against the curve of her stomach, watching the space where her husband had just been. 8 months. She was 8 months along. Colin. She hadn't meant for his name to come out that quietly. He came back to the doorway, not all the way in, just far enough to be seen. He had his charcoal coat on, the one she'd chosen with him at the Boxing Day sale 2 Decembers ago, and a duffel bag in his left hand she recognized as already packed. The bag told her everything she needed to know about how long this moment had been planned. "Don't make this dramatic," he said. "I'm not making anything. You're the one with the bag." He exhaled through his nose the way he did when he thought she was being deliberately obtuse. "I've been unhappy for a long time, Lara. You've been somewhere else. That project. The trials. Every evening, every weekend, you're on that laptop or at the lab or on the phone with Dr. Anand. I don't even exist in this apartment anymore. I've been building something. For who? Not for me, not for us." He shifted the bag on his shoulder. "Tanya actually listens when I talk. She's interested in my life. She's 28 years old and she works in your office building." Lara set down the glass of water she'd been holding. Her hand was perfectly steady. She was proud of that. "I know who Tanya is, Colin. I've known for a while." Something flickered across his face, guilt maybe, or just surprise at being caught. Either way, it passed quickly. "I need a life that's actually happening," he said. "Not one that's been on hold for 2 years waiting for your project to pay off. I can't keep living in a maybe." "Your daughter isn't a maybe." He looked at her stomach, really looked, and for one breath Lara thought something would shift in him. Some anchor would catch and hold. But he just tightened his grip on the bag. "You'll be fine," he said. "You always are." And then he left. The door didn't slam this time. That was almost worse. The quiet, deliberate click of the latch catching behind him, like a period at the end of a sentence. Lara stood in the kitchen for a long time. She didn't cry there. She walked to the bathroom, sat on the edge of the tub, and cried with the tap running so the sound wouldn't carry. She gave herself until the water went cold. Then she washed her face, looked at herself in the mirror for one long moment, and went to the bedroom to start making a list. She was good at lists. She had always been good at lists. Her cousin Beverly showed up the next morning before Lara had called her. Bev was like that. She materialized when needed, smelling of coffee and practicality, with a flat dolly borrowed from her building's superintendent and zero interest in discussing feelings until all the boxes were moved. "You can stay in my spare room," Bev said on her 3rd trip up the stairs. "I'm getting my own place." "Lara." "I need my own place, Bev." Bev studied her for a moment and then nodded. "Okay, but eat this first." She held out a foil-wrapped breakfast sandwich she'd clearly bought on the way over, Tim Hortons. Because Bev was a woman who understood that crisis management begins with protein. The apartment appeared on Kijiji the same week, a 1-bedroom on the 3rd floor of a brick building on Kingston Road, the kind of place where the radiators knocked at night, and the superintendent's name was taped to the inside of the mailbox in faded block letters. It cost $1,650 a month. Lara had $219 in her checking account, and 6 weeks of maternity leave eligibility she hadn't touched yet. She did not think about the Med-Access folder sitting in her email. She did not think about the message from their acquisitions team that had come in 10 days ago, unanswered. There was too much to manage right now. The hydro deposit, the lease, the crib she'd ordered in September still flat packed in the spare room of the house she'd just left. She went back to work 3 days after moving in. Her colleagues in the NICU gave her the particular gentle treatment reserved for women navigating visible pain, careful eyes, extra coffee, nobody mentioning Colin's name, Dr. Kavya Anand, the neonatologist who had been Lara's clinical partner on the monitoring trials for 2 years, squeezed her shoulder once without saying a word. That was enough. Lara worked her shifts and came home and heated soup from a can, and opened the Med-Access email at 11:30 on a Thursday night, sitting on the kitchen floor with her back against the cupboards, because the chair she'd ordered hadn't arrived yet. The apartment was quiet, except for the traffic noise from the street below, and the low knock of the radiators beginning to warm. The message was brief. They had completed their internal review of the Neotrace patent application. They were interested in moving to formal acquisition discussions. They were, the message said, very interested. She read it 4 times. Then she closed the laptop and went to bed. She did not let herself think about what very interested might mean. Not yet. She was the kind of woman who had learned, through years of night shift nursing and 2 rounds of clinical trials, and 3 years of being told her idea was ambitious, which was the polite word for unlikely, that hope held too loosely makes you foolish, and hope held too tightly makes you brittle. She kept hers somewhere in between. Her daughter was born on a Thursday morning in January, 7 minutes past 6, in the same hospital where Lara had worked for 9 years. She weighed 3 kilograms and 400 grams. She had a fist of dark hair and an expression of profound outrage that Lara decided immediately was the correct response to being brought into the world. She named her Iris. Bev was in the waiting room, Colin was not. He had texted once, 2 days before the due date, "Thinking of you, hope everything goes okay." Lara had read it, set the phone face down on the nightstand and not answered. She lay in the hospital bed that first night with Iris asleep against her chest and stared at the ceiling, and felt something enormous and difficult to name move through her. Not happiness exactly, or not only happiness. More like a door opening onto a room she hadn't known existed, large and quiet and lit in a way she couldn't quite explain. "You and I," she told Iris very quietly, so as not to wake the other mother on the far side of the curtain, "are going to be all right. I need you to know that early, we are absolutely going to be all right." Iris slept on, unconvinced. The formal discussions with MedAxis began in March, when Iris was 8 weeks old and sleeping in 4-hour stretches, and Lara had learned to do everything one-handed. There were 3 meetings by video conference and then one in a boardroom in downtown Toronto, where Lara arrived with a printed copy of every dataset from both clinical trials, a 1-page executive summary she had written at 2 in the morning, while Iris slept in the carrier strapped to her chest, and absolutely no tolerance for being underestimated. The MedAxis legal team was not small. Their lead acquisitions officer, a man named Bruce, mid-50s, who had clearly been expecting someone older, looked at Lara across the boardroom table, 34 years old with a baby monitor app open on her second screen, and nursing pads tucked into her bag, and made the mistake of beginning the meeting by asking whether she'd like to speak to her agent or representative first. "I'm my own representative," Lara said pleasantly. "Shall we begin?" The NeoTrace patch was, by the clinical data, straightforwardly remarkable. A wireless adhesive sensor no larger than a bandage that monitored neonatal oxygen saturation, heart rate, and skin temperature in real time, syncing to nursing station tablets and reducing false alarms by 63% in the trial ward. In a healthcare system as stretched as Ontario's, 63% was not a number anyone was inclined to argue with. The negotiations took 6 weeks. MedAxis made 3 offers. Lara, with a family law attorney and an intellectual property specialist she'd hired on contingency, countered all 3. The final agreement was signed on a Tuesday afternoon in April. $38.5 million for full patent acquisition, plus a royalty structure on all commercial licensing for 15 years. Lara signed her name with the pen the attorney handed her, and sat very still for a moment afterward, conscious of the pen still in her fingers, conscious of Iris at Bev's apartment across the city, conscious of how quiet the boardroom had suddenly become. "Congratulations," the MedAxis attorney said. "Thank you," Lara said. And then, because the situation seemed to call for something more, "Could I have a glass of water, please?" She had not wanted publicity. She had not sought a press conference, or a photograph, or a human interest angle. But MedAxis had their own communications team, and the story of a neonatal nurse who had invented a life-saving monitoring device, while working 12-hour shifts and raising an infant alone was, apparently, not something a communications department could be persuaded to keep quiet. The item ran on a regional news segment on a Thursday evening in early May. It also ran in the Ontario Science and Technology newsletter, the Toronto Star's business section, and 2 LinkedIn posts from MedAxis executives that collectively received nearly 50,000 impressions. Colin Rourke saw it on the television in Tanya's living room, where he had been half watching a hockey game, with the particular quality of distraction belonging to a man trying not to think about several things at once. He recognized Lara's name before the anchor finished saying it. The camera found her face, composed, tired in the way that mothers of young infants are tired, but with something underneath it that he recognized and had always, he realized too late, underestimated. The number appeared on screen. The bottle in Colin's hand made a dull sound as he set it down on the coffee table. "Isn't that?" Tanya began. "Yeah," Colin said, "it is." He did not sleep that night. He tried her cell the next morning. The number rang twice and went to voicemail. He left a message stilted, too long, full of pauses he couldn't fill. He tried again 2 days later, voicemail again. This time he hung up without speaking. He drove to the Scarborough building he'd tracked down through a mutual acquaintance who'd let something slip, and stood on the front steps with a bag of groceries, and rang the buzzer 3 times. "She's not here," Bev's voice on the intercom, unmistakable. "I just need 5 minutes." "She moved last month, Colin." "Where?" A pause long enough to feel like its own answer. "Somewhere you don't have the address for. Go home." He emailed her attorney instead, a carefully worded message about co-parenting arrangements, written and rewritten 6 times. The attorney replied within 24 hours. A single paragraph confirming receipt, referencing the formal separation agreement already in process, noting that all further communication should be directed to their office. Colin stared at that email for a long time. He had expected something. That she would answer. That she would be angry in the productive way that opens conversation. That $38.5 million would somehow soften her, where the pregnancy and the abandonment had not. He had not expected the clean architectural silence she had built around herself, wall by wall, entirely without his help. Meanwhile, the life he'd chosen was doing what lives do when built on uncertain ground. Tanya had not left immediately. She'd stayed through May, through June, even through the weeks in late summer, when Colin's firm announced the restructuring that eliminated his senior project role. But by September she was taking longer to come home, and by October she had stopped pretending to have reasons for it. "I care about you," she said one evening, at the kitchen table, with the careful stillness of someone who has rehearsed. "But this isn't what I thought it would be. Because I lost the job. Because we don't want the same things." A pause. "I think I've been figuring that out for a while." She was gone in 6 weeks, taking her standing mixer and her record collection and the particular brightness she'd carried when they first began. The apartment felt half its size without her things in it, which told him something he didn't want to know about how much he'd been filling his evenings. Employment insurance stretched to December. After that came contract work, project coordination for a small construction firm that paid inconsistently and expected flexibility, which in practice meant long days on active build sites in a borrowed hard hat, trying not to think about the career he'd had 6 months ago. His parents' place in Oshawa became the next option in February, when the landlord declined to renew the lease. His mother made up the guest room without comment. His father found reasons to be elsewhere in the house. Colin lay awake in his childhood bedroom and stared at the glow-in-the-dark stars he'd stuck to the ceiling when he was 11 years old, and never taken down, and thought about a woman standing in a kitchen with a glass of water, her hand perfectly steady, watching him leave. He tried not to think about Iris. That was the one he couldn't manage. Every time he let himself go there, what she looked like now, whether she had Lara's eyes or his, whether she knew his voice at all, he had to find something to do with his hands or the feeling would flatten him entirely. He had called his daughter a future he wasn't ready for. He had called her a problem, though not in those words, which didn't make it better. He lay in his childhood bedroom with the stars slowly dimming above him and understood, with a clarity that came far too late to be useful, that the problem had always been him. The hospital job came through the construction firm in April, a 3-month contract on the interior finishing of a new wing at a major teaching hospital in North Toronto. Good hourly rate, early starts. "Keep your head down," the site foreman told him. "The client is paying attention to every detail." The wing had a name. Colin saw it on his first day. Large frosted glass letters being installed on the interior wall of the main atrium by a crew he wasn't part of, the Beaumont Neonatal Innovation Center. He stood there a beat too long, his tool belt heavy on his hips, staring at those letters. "You coming?" the man beside him said. "Yeah," Colin said. "Sorry." He kept his head down after that. He was there to install trim work along the corridor windows on the 2nd floor. Careful, detailed work that he'd gotten reasonably competent at over the winter. He focused on the trim. He did not let himself think about the letters in the atrium. The morning of the naming ceremony, he was on a coffee break in the ground floor corridor, sitting on an overturned bucket, when he heard the PA system being tested, and the low murmur of a gathering beginning to fill the atrium below. The foreman had been very specific. 2nd floor or the east service corridor, stay clear of the main atrium until the event was finished. Colin drifted toward the main atrium. He didn't plan it, or he planned it the way people plan things they won't admit to planning. He heard the voices and he set down his coffee cup and he walked toward the sound, and he was in the atrium before he decided to be. There were perhaps 60 people, hospital administrators in lanyards, a delegation of NIC nurses in their scrubs, a man at a podium speaking about innovation and the future of neonatal care in Canada, cameras from 2 local news stations, and Lara. She stood to the left of the podium, holding Iris on her hip. Iris, 16 months old, Colin calculated with a pang he felt in his sternum, was wearing a yellow jacket over navy dungarees and had a quantity of dark hair that neither parent had quite prepared him for. She was studying the atrium ceiling with the focused intensity of a child who has recently discovered that large rooms contain interesting acoustics. Lara was dressed simply. Dark trousers, a cream blazer. Her hair pulled back, she looked settled. There was a quality to her posture, a steadiness that he didn't remember from the years of their marriage and that he suspected had nothing to do with the money. She was saying something to the woman beside her when she felt the shift, the way people sometimes do, and turned. Their eyes met across 40 feet of gleaming new floor. Recognition moved across her face in sequence. Surprise, then something that wasn't anger and wasn't warmth, but a kind of absolute steadiness, the way a door doesn't move in its frame when it's properly hung. Colin crossed the atrium. He wasn't aware of deciding to. He was aware of the hard hat in his hands. He'd taken it off somewhere without knowing when, and of the sound his boots made on the floor, and of the small shift in the crowd as people noticed a man in work clothes moving toward the woman at the podium. Lara, he stopped 10 feet from her, close enough. Colin. Her voice was level. She adjusted Iris on her hip. Iris looked at him with the direct evaluating gaze of a child who has not yet learned that staring is rude. What are you doing here? I'm on the build crew, trim work, second floor. He heard how it sounded, he couldn't help it. I didn't know you'd be. Well, I knew this was your project, your wing. I just didn't. It's all right, she said quietly to the woman beside her who had taken a half step forward. Give us a moment. The crowd rearranged itself tactfully into a loose semicircle that was definitely not staring. I know I don't have the right to ask anything, Colin said. He'd promised himself he wouldn't do this. He was doing it anyway, because standing in front of her with his hard hat in his hands, in the atrium that bore her name, the speech he'd rehearsed in his parents' guest room held up very poorly under the actual conditions. I just want to say, every single day, for over a year I've thought about that night. About what I said, about what I chose. Lara was quiet for a moment. Iris reached up and patted her mother's collar with one small hand, unhurried, unconcerned. I made a mistake, he said. I know that, it doesn't fix anything. I just need you to know that I know. I believe you, Lara said, simply without performance, so that he understood she meant it. I don't doubt that, Colin. I've thought about it too, whether you could have been different in different circumstances. Whether we could have. We could have been, he said quickly. Maybe. She looked at him with an expression he couldn't classify. Not unkind, and not forgiving in the way he'd imagined, because the kind he'd imagined was soft and open doors, and this was something else entirely. But here's what you keep getting wrong. You think the mistake was leaving when things were hard. That's not quite it. He waited. You left, she said, because you decided what I was worth. You looked at 3 years of research and 2 rounds of clinical trials, and every night I stayed up past midnight on that laptop, and you decided it wasn't real. You decided I wasn't real. The baby, the work, the future I was trying to build for all 3 of us. In your calculation, it didn't add up to enough. That's who you were that night, Colin. Not a man who made a mistake under pressure. A man who showed me his accounting. I was wrong. Yes, you were, and I'd be lying if I said the money didn't clarify things. Not because I needed it to know my own value, I already knew that, but because it clarified things for you, apparently. And that's the part I can't work with. She shifted Iris once more gently. You're not a bad person. I'm not standing here thinking badly of you. But you are someone who priced things too early and too finally. And I am someone who cannot unknow that about you. I want to be in her life. He looked at Iris, the dark hair, the yellow jacket, the way she was now studying a point somewhere above his left shoulder with great seriousness. Whatever I can be, whatever you'll allow. Talk to the lawyer, Lara said. Not unkindly, that path is open, it always has been. If you want to know your daughter, that is how it happens, and I will not stand in the way of it. She deserves to know where she comes from. A pause. But that path doesn't run through me. And it doesn't undo what happened in that kitchen. A hospital coordinator in a lanyard had drifted toward them, apologetic expression, the ceremony needing to begin. Lara turned to go. Then she stopped and looked back at him once, briefly. I hope you find your footing, she said. And she said it the way she said most things, like she meant it. I genuinely do. Then she walked away. Toward the podium, toward the cameras, toward the atrium full of people waiting to name something after her. She didn't look back again. The ceremony began, and the voices swelled in that bright new room. And Colin stood at the edge of it with his hard hat in his hands and a feeling in his chest that was large and wordless and far too late. The site foreman found him a minute later. Rourke, second floor now. Right, Colin said. Sorry yet. He turned and walked back through the service corridor, back toward the stairwell and the trim work, and the ordinary manageable work of the day. But as he climbed the stairs, he found he wasn't thinking about Lara's face when she turned away, or the number in the deal, or the letters on the atrium wall. He was thinking about Iris's hand on her mother's collar. That small, unhurried pat, the total confidence of it, a child touching solid ground, the way you touch something you have never once had reason to doubt. That was what he'd walked away from. Not a burden, not a weight around his ankle, a foundation. and you cannot rebuild a foundation from outside the building. He went back to work. He did the trim carefully, because that was the only way he knew to do anything anymore. And at the end of the day he collected his tools and his timesheet and drove back to Oshawa. His daughter grew up knowing exactly who had shown up for her and exactly who hadn't. Iris Beaumont would ask about her father once, when she was 7 years old, and Lara would answer her honestly and without bitterness, with the particular tenderness reserved for truths you've had time to make peace with. And then they would make dinner together. Something simple, something good, and the kitchen would fill up with sound, and that would be enough. It had never been about the money. Lara had always known that. Not about the patent or the wing or the check. It was about 3 years of waking before dawn to work on something she believed in. It was about the 18 months she'd spent collecting data on a ward full of premature infants, learning what their bodies were trying to say before the alarms did. It was about being the kind of person who builds things even when no one is watching, especially when no one is watching. Because the building itself is the point. Colin Rourke had stood in a kitchen and looked at that person and decided she wasn't worth staying for. She had turned out to be worth rather a lot. But she had known that before he left. That, in the end, was the part he had always missed.